cops are gonna get called, and then you're gonna get a possession problem and you're gonna end up in jail, and that's just not a good idea. Your van's gonna get towed. Hello Snack Pack, welcome back to Travel Snacks. Today's episode is all about overnight parking in residential areas. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to park for free in regular neighborhoods, on public streets, and even in apartment complexes. This video is referring specifically to residential neighborhoods, but I have a very long list of other places that you can park in your vehicle in this video. I'll be giving you a very solid list of do's and don'ts. Between living in my car and living in my van, I've parked in close to 100 different neighborhoods across the United States. And I have a lot to say about this topic, so let's jump right in. I started living in my car in 2019 and moved into a van at the end of 2020. In that time, as I mentioned in the intro, I've stayed in close to 100 different neighborhoods, and I've only had two issues. Once when the sheriff knocked on my window, and once when a resident of a fancy neighborhood put a note on my windshield not to park in their neighborhood. I'll speak about those instances in a future video. 2 out of close to 100 isn't that bad of odds, so I still recommend staying in residential neighborhoods at times. These tips work for cars, SUVs, trucks, and vans, but the larger the vehicle, the harder it is to stay stealth. And if you have a large RV or school bus, residential parking may be a little harder to come by. So first I'm going to go through the list of do's, and then I'll show you a real-time clip of me looking for parking at night in a city I've never parked in before. Then I'll give you my tips for how to find parking, then we'll go to the don'ts, and then I'll leave you with my final thoughts. First of all, do follow the law, and I say that with a little side note. Definitely follow the law. Don't be just randomly just parking in places, especially if there's private property signs. Don't park there. In certain cities and counties, they have ordinances that habitation in a vehicle is illegal. I strongly do not agree with that thinking, and allegedly I have parked and slept in a vehicle in cities where that was against the law. However, I'm still going to give you these tips because I still think people should be able to sleep peacefully, even in their car, on public property. But to avoid any tickets or towing issues, do try to follow the laws. Also, when you're parking in residential areas, make sure to look out for signage. Read the signs. Now, I just told you that in residential neighborhoods, you should read the signs. And now I want you to read this sign. Yep, to become part of the Snack Pack, all you gotta do is hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, throw a like on this video, and keep watching to the end. I have so many more tips and tricks for parking in residential neighborhoods for free. Read the signs, drive up and down the street, and make sure that there are not any signs that say, do not park here at these certain times, do not park here at all. If you roll up to a neighborhood and there's a posted neighborhood watch sign, avoid those areas. They have come together as a neighborhood, and somebody is in charge of calling the authorities if they see something that they deem suspicious. Next, you're gonna wanna park for your comfort. Try to park in neighborhoods that are away from busy streets, highways, train tracks, or airports. Also, people that don't live in vehicles don't think about this next one. Look for a street that's on a flat surface. When you're sleeping in a vehicle, if you end up parking on a downhill angle or uphill angle, or if the street tilts towards the gutter, probably not going to be the most restful sleep, and depending on how steep the hill is, you might roll out of your bed, so you don't want to do that. Now, to keep from getting noticed as much, park on a street that has a few cars on it. Not overcrowded, but a few cars, so you know that street parking is allowed. Occasionally you'll find a street that has street parking, but it's permit parking, and usually there'll be a sign for that. But if you see little stickers on the car windshields, then you might be in a private parking area. Now, my best advice is when you're driving around a neighborhood, look for sections that have no houses, maybe on one side of the street or on both sides of the street, and maybe there's houses up ahead. Usually there's a few houses that have a big fence or a wall on one side of their house, and that's where you want to park. That's the sweet spot, so that you're not parked right in front of somebody's house. And on that note, if you're going to be creeping around a neighborhood, try to do that during daylight hours. Just look around and see if you find something, drop a pin, and come back later. If you do it at night, you run the risk of having people in the neighborhood wondering what this van is doing, lurking around their neighborhood. To avoid this, I'm going to share a tip with you so that you don't have to be creeping in neighborhoods. So stay tuned for that in just a few minutes. Also, if you're going into a neighborhood, try to get there a little later, after 9 or 10, and try to leave a little earlier, and don't stay more than one night at a time. Occasionally, you can get away with parking in the same spot 2 nights in a row, but no more than that. Just a little side tip, make sure that you have tinted windows. I know that it can be an added cost, but tinted windows will really save the day, as well as window coverings. So if anyone's trying to look in, especially with a flashlight, they're not gonna be able to see in. Also, I do highly recommend putting a curtain between the driving area and these front seats, so you don't have to put that shade up at night, because that's another sure sign that somebody's sleeping in the car. And if you have this driving area open, it doesn't look as suspicious if somebody's just passing by. And my final thing to do is to follow your instincts. If you're in an area and you're just unsure, you get this feeling like, I'm not sure if I should be parking here, don't do it. Just leave. And also, if you get the dreaded knock on your window in the middle of the night, just leave the area. Don't try to argue and cause a big scene. Just move to another location. It's really not worth it in that moment to put yourself in harm's way or in any extra trouble. Okay, so now that we've covered the do's, I'm gonna give you my super secret tip of how I find residential parking without having to drive up and down the streets looking for it physically. Okay, lean in for this. I think it's a genius idea. You might be like, but listen. I go on the Realtor app or the Zillow app and I look for houses in a specific price range that aren't too fancy or too rundown. This will show you the neighborhoods, and if you zoom in, you can even see from a high-level street view if people are parking on the streets in those neighborhoods. Now, the satellite view is not going to be 100% accurate because that's just one image, but it gives you kind of a good idea of how the street looks, what the houses look like, what the neighborhood looks like. If you find a neighborhood that you are like, that looks pretty good, click on a couple of the houses and scroll down through the pictures and find the street view. Open that up and do kind of a 360 view of the street. This is going to give you even more information to see if other people are parking on the street or if there's no curbs to park on and other stuff like that, which I'm going to get to in a few minutes on the don'ts. Now, if the Realtor or Zillow apps aren't working for you, you can also use Google Earth or Google Maps to zoom in a little bit and look at some of the residential areas to get a better view. So recently I was in a city that I hadn't parked overnight in before, and I just filmed myself looking for parking. So I'll show you that now, and when I come back, I'm going to talk about parking in apartment complexes and some of the things you want to stay away from. So I've been sitting in a Walmart parking lot in a city that I've never parked my van in before. I've been doing editing for many hours, and now it's almost 10 p.m. so I'm going to leave this parking lot and go find a residential area to sleep in. Now, earlier when I was driving around, on a side street I saw that there was like a community name, and it looked like it had flat streets that I could park on. So I'm just gonna drive over in that area and look around. So right now, it may be hard to see, but this street is going downward at a slant. So I'm trying to find a street that is not slanted. If I turn down one of these streets, this street is pretty flat, and there's a few cars on the street, so you know that street parking is available. I don't see any signs that say you can't park. And typically I would look for a spot that is on the side of the house with a gate or a fence, so it's not in somebody's yard. So this car right here, let's see, right in front of me, is parked by this person's walled-in area. Now that's a great spot, but he's already there. But I can park right in front. And then I immediately turn off my lights, turn off my van, and go in the back. Okay, so then I just close my shades or my curtain, put my keys right next to my bed, and I'm already in my pajamas, ready for bed. So this was a pretty easy residential area to park in. Another tip I like to use is to start at a major department store or grocery store like Walmart, Kohl's, Ross, Marshall's, Target, something like that. Usually there's neighborhoods kind of around that area. Can't speak to all cities in all states, but in a lot of them there's neighborhoods, and usually those are single family homes. All right, I'm going to bed. I could have also parked all along this side of the street because it's all no houses. But it's a little too open because there was no other cars, and I don't want my van just sticking out like a sore thumb. So I parked along this street next to this wall, and other cars are on this street. So it just kind of doesn't look like it's out of place. I mean, it is, but not as much. And I didn't see it last night, but this whole street, this whole section is walled off. Okay, that was just an example of me looking for parking in a regular old neighborhood, but what if there's a neighborhood that doesn't have curbs or has some kind of thing where you can't park, but you see several apartment complexes? Let's dive into that right now. Apartment complexes can be tricky. I've lived in a few apartment complexes in California, and each of those had different rules for parking. So the first consideration is, again, to read the signs. Most likely it'll tell you right away if you're able to park there or not. Now, in a pinch, I have parked in apartment complexes that said private property, tow zone, whatever, but I drove around for just a couple minutes and noticed that there was an abundance of spaces in the back. There was no signage back there, and it worked out. What I've noticed is that for apartment complexes, covered spots are for the residents and open spots are for guests. Now, where that starts to fall apart is if they have permit parking. Permit parking is where, as a resident, you have to call the main office and get a sticker or a notice for your guest and put it on their dashboard. If you drive around and you see that almost all the cars have a sticker or a piece of paper on the dashboard, then most likely it's permit parking and you're going to want to stay away from that. Obviously, if you're in a tall van and they only have garage parking, you're not going to want to park in there because you're not going to want to rip off the top of your van. And if you're going to an apartment complex with maybe 20 units or less, most likely it's not a good idea to park there because it's a smaller community, and most likely if you're in a large van, you're going to stick out in that community. Now, if you've driven around some apartment complexes and you can't find parking by doing that, there's another trick that I use, and I go on the apartments.com app, I type in the area, and I scroll up and I look for the amenities that say parking. I click on that apartment complex, I scroll down to the parking section, and I see if they have street parking, covered parking, guest parking. It doesn't always say, but you can kind of get a good idea. Also, on the pictures of that apartment complex, they'll usually have a street view so that you can see what the parking lot looks like. And if you're really in a pinch and you just absolutely want to stay in an apartment complex, you can call during the day and act like you're gonna rent there and say, how's the parking? Is there guest parking? Blah, blah, blah. And then you can just park there. Now, we've talked about all the fun stuff of residential parking, and now we're going to move on to the don'ts. First of all, if a street is overcrowded, don't take up spots for the people that live there. For you to take up a spot for someone that lives there and has to park there every night, it's just not really fair. Next, don't park directly in front of somebody's house. And also, that's a little unsettling if you park a big van or even a suspicious car right in front of somebody's house. It just makes people feel uneasy, so don't do it. And I really shouldn't have to say this, but I'm going to anyways. Never park in front of somebody's driveway or the back end or the front end of your vehicle is impeding their ability to leave. If you find a good spot, but it's kind of on the edge of the curb or where somebody turns or next to a stop sign, don't park there either. Especially if you have a van, you're going to be right in the place where people need to turn, and it can block people's view so they can't really see if other cars are coming. I also don't recommend parking in cul-de-sacs or where there's a sign that says no outlet. And usually there's only like 4 or 5 houses in that cul-de-sac, and if there's a suspicious car or van, they're going to notice. If you notice a lot of trash cans on the street, don't park there because the next day is probably trash day. Even if signs are not posted, the residents know when trash day is. Now, these last few don'ts are ones you should absolutely not do. I haven't really noticed this in California, where I'm from, but as I've traveled a lot through the US, there's certain cities and areas where there just aren't curbs. I really never saw that before, but it's just flat and then there's just grass. If you're in an area where there's no curbs, long driveways, or grassy areas in front of a house and no cars on the street, that means that people that live there park in their driveways or on the grassy patch, and if they have visitors, they park right in front of that person's house. If you're driving down the street and you see a motion sensor go off in front of a house, don't park there. Those people are on it. They don't want people parking or even driving down their street. Or if they have cameras on the outside of their house or the little ring light, they also are trying to be very protective of their area. Also, you live in a van or a car. Don't park around schools or daycare centers. And if you see basketball courts or little soccer nets or whatever, toys or whatever on the street, things that indicate that kids are in that neighborhood, just don't park there. You know there's already a stigma against vans, and especially weird white vans like mine. People with little kids are super protective. I understand, I get it. If they see a van parked in their neighborhood, they're probably gonna call the cops. Once you park, the rule is do not get out of your vehicle. You should already have your pajamas on, you should already be ready for bed, park and get in the back and go to sleep. If you get out and you're not going to anybody's house and then you get back in, people are gonna know you're sleeping in there. Now on a little side note, I have received some messages and comments that want me to address residential parking for people of color. Now I'm not a person of color, so I can't speak from that experience. In my experience, when I've parked in every residential neighborhood, I park later at night. When I was in my car, I would immediately put up my window shield, and now in my van, I immediately pull this curtain back. Unless people are outside for some reason or looking out their windows, nobody sees who's in the vehicle, so I still think people of color can park in residential neighborhoods. If you never get out and nobody ever sees you, they don't know who's in the vehicle. But also, if you park in a neighborhood and say the sheriff's department gets called and you get the knock on the window, I can't vouch for the treatment that somebody would receive depending on their skin color. So that's a decision you have to make based on your comfort level. And finally, the number one thing that you definitely do not want to do is be a menace to the neighborhood. Now, I say most nomads, especially full-time nomads, are peaceful, kind, considerate, and they don't cause any problems. But with anything, there's always people that ruin it for others. And I know that nobody watching this would do this, but I'm gonna say it anyways, just in case. Do not park your vehicle and start blasting your music real loud, or turn on a generator, or just make excessive noise. It's a bad idea. Secondly, do not litter on someone's street. That's so rude. Save it in your van or your car and throw it away later in a trash can. Now, I'm not into the weed smokes. I don't partake, but if you do, that's your own prerogative. But if you're gonna puff on the marijuana and it's just like permeating that smell everywhere, I find that so gross, and I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for that, but I'm just telling you my opinion. It's just gonna like make people think that you're doing drugs in your van. People just have this weird illusion that if you smoke weed, you're also shooting up heroin or doing some meth or crack cocaine or whatever in your van. So if you're gonna partake in the weed smokes, don't use the kind that smells so much. That's just gonna draw attention, and the cops are gonna get called, and then you're gonna get a possession problem and you're gonna end up in jail.
And that's just not a good idea. Your van's gonna get towed. It's a whole problem. Just do the vape pen or the edible or something like that.
And don't call attention to yourself. Now, I know that's a lot of information and that's a lot to remember, but a lot of the things that I mentioned are just common sense, and the more you practice staying in residential neighborhoods, the easier it is. In my experience, staying in neighborhoods has been super peaceful. It's usually more quiet, I feel more safe, and I get a better night's sleep because I feel like I'm more in a community. It also gives you that slight sense of home that you might miss sometimes living on the road. Now, I know I covered a lot, but if you have any additional tips or advice for staying in residential areas or apartment complexes, drop it in the comments. Share it with a snack pack. Bye for now. To date, I'll be giving you a lot, as I've been, so this was pretty, and I get a better, and I get a better, so if you've had, and not only, and I know I don't, and I know I, or on both sides, as I go on real, so if you're gonna park an apartment, now if you've driven around, started living in my van, and this is not going well. Snack time.